Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. If you have seen our recent videos, then you know we've been exploring the beautiful country of Portugal. We spent 2 days down in Lisbon, soaking up the culture and amazing culinary delights this area has to offer. Then we traveled by train up to Porto, which gave us some amazing beaches and incredible views down the Douro River. There was one more thing we had left to do before we left this country, and that was go on a port wine tasting down the Douro Valley. The Douro is the largest river on the Iberian Peninsula, and it flows for nearly 600 miles before emptying into the Atlantic near Porto. The high valley walls make this place an amazing natural wonder, and it's absolutely incredible to see in person. These walls also help to keep the climate fairly stable and warm here, and with all the hours of sunlight this place gets throughout the year, it's perfect for growing grapes. Because of this, there are plenty of wine tours that you can go on, all expertly crafted by tour companies to work with vineyards and give customers some of the best ports and wines Portugal has to offer, while also giving them some amazing views of the valley. We decided to go on a tour today with Cool Tour ao Porto, a local tour operator. You can find the link down below for the tour that we went to, and check it out for yourself. Just to make it clear here, we didn't receive any compensation for giving this review, but it was such a good experience that we felt like we had to share it with you. This tour is a semi-private tour operated by Cool Tour, and on this day there was only one other group with us. We had seen some negative reviews before going, saying that there were groups of 20 people packed like sardines into large vans. However, we were picked up right at our Airbnb by an 8-seat van, and there ended up being a group of 3, and then us, so really we were comfortable throughout the trip. And our driver, João, mentioned that because of the bad reviews, the tour operator decided to get smaller vans, and they would only make them available to groups of 7 or fewer in the future. As we mentioned, we were picked up right at our Airbnb in Foz de Douro, which is located on the ocean about 20 minutes away from the Porto city center. We traveled into the city center and picked up the second half of our tour group near the Clergios Tower, and then we were on our way. For this tour, because the groups are so small, you can get picked up right at your hotel or Airbnb. You just have to enter the details when you make the booking. Our tour today would be centered around the Vineyard region, deep in the Portuguese countryside, located just 40 miles from the Spanish border. To get there would take nearly 2 hours driving, but on the way, our guide let us rest for a bit in the morning, and then told us the history of the area, as well as about the grape production here. Our driver João was a very good driver, and was full of information. We felt safe on our entire trip out here. He asked us what we wanted to get from this experience, and said that he generally has some leeway from the tour company to make sure we get the tour that we want. It's almost like they can customize little bits to make sure you have a good time. About an hour and a half into the journey, we stopped at this pretty little countryside town to get some coffee, while João made preparations for our first stop. This was such a beautiful little village, the coffee was amazing, and the beginning of our wine tasting day couldn't have been better. After about 20 minutes, we made our first stop, a vineyard called the Quinta dos CastelAres. This building was very unassuming, and we would have driven right by it if we didn't know it was here. Inside, we met our vineyard tour guide, who gave us a first bit of wine to try with some local cheese, and it was great. We tried 2 more wines down in the cellar before checking out some of the old winemaking equipment that was down here. The whole time, the tour guide was providing us with several facts about the winery, including the history of the family that started it. We were then escorted upstairs and taken into the room where the grapes actually used to be smashed by foot. In one of these old vats, we were able to try another wine with some bread and olive oil. Again, it was delicious. From there, we were led outside where we could get a great view of the valley below. Here the guide told us more about the land that the vineyard owns, both here and further down the river. It's hard to believe how many grapes it takes to make a vineyard successful, and it was impossible to imagine the number of vines that were in this valley. It was absolutely enormous. We were then led into a very old and beautiful room which was located above the main production floor, where we tried some of the vineyard's port wine. Again, it was delicious. From here, we thought we would make our way back out to the car, but we were surprised again when our tour guide mentioned that we weren't quite finished. We were led back outside and tried some of the flavored honeys that are also produced at this vineyard. This first stop really hit it out of the park.
Yeah, how was it?
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah, it was awesome. It's beautiful here.
Now, to be honest with you, we don't remember exactly which wines we were generally given, but on all of these tours we were given a white, a red, a rosé, and sometimes a few of each. At this point, we'd had several glasses of wine, and it was getting to be about noon, so our guide took us to the nearby city of Sabrosa to a small little restaurant for lunch. We went to Restaurant Tipico. Lunch is included on this tour, which was great. We were expecting a sad little sandwich box like you get on many of the other tours where meals are included, but this was a proper lunch. And to be honest, the amount of food that came out was closer to what an American would consider dinner. Our guide ordered us several different types of food, including several different types of grilled and roast sausage, battered codfish, grilled steak, and a very good vegetable soup. We were allowed to have as much as we wanted, including some pretty decent desserts as well. Of course, wine and water were served with the meal. We were very impressed by this lunch. After lunch, we got back in the van and headed to the next vineyard, which was again great, and it was right down by the water. After this visit, we went to the city of Pinhao, which is right on the Douro River. As part of our tour, we could either walk around this little town, or we could take a cruise up the Douro. Everyone on our tour opted for the cruise. We met up with one of the large tourist boats, which operates on this river. Our guide provided us the tickets, and we headed on for the hour-and-a-half-long sailing up and down the Douro River. We still can't believe just how unbelievably beautiful this valley is. You really feel like you're cruising through a postcard. This region puts many of the other wine regions in the world to shame as far as natural beauty goes.
How's it going?
It's great.
It's beautiful.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
One thing we do want to say about this boat ride, though, is that it was very warm. We had to alternate between being outside in the sun and back in the shade. There are not assigned seats or anything like that on this boat tour, so you can sit wherever you want. But it was very hot today.
Too much direct sunlight?
Yeah, it's nice on the way back. Now we're on the inside.
Yes, and it's still pretty breezy in here,
Yeah.
so it's nice.
Yeah.
On this boat ride, we were able to see some very old railroad bridges and houses. The tracks that run alongside the Douro River belong to another tourist attraction, the Douro Line. This rail line is often referred to as being the most scenic in all of Portugal, and it runs from Porto's São Bento station along the river to Pichinho, located a few miles from the Spanish border. We've read great things about this train journey and would have done it ourselves, but we really just didn't have time. A one-way ticket on this train costs as little as $15. So if you're visiting Porto and want to make the trip out to Pinhao, the train is a viable option, though it can take about 2.5 hours. Eventually, the boat turned around and we started making our way back to the dock. There we met up once again with our driver João, who took us back to the van. We started driving back towards Porto on the way to our next vineyard. This part of the ride took us to the other side of the river, where we actually passed a couple of the many dams that block up the Douro. There are a total of 15 dams on the Douro, which not only help with navigating the river by boat, but also produce nearly 50% of Portugal's hydroelectric power. This river keeps surprising us at every turn. Eventually we arrived at the final vineyard, the Quinta Santa Eufemia.
Bumpers. Said that this is the guard dog.
This vineyard again boasts an amazing view out over the river. From here you could see the larger part of the production plant below, as well as the dam off in the distance. At this vineyard we were going to try some of the few ports that they produced. First, the vintner led us down into the old production rooms where the grapes were smashed, telling us about all of the grape smashing parties that the local town would have here after the harvest. Next, we were led into a storage room which is filled with enormous barrels of port wine. We were told all about how the storage of port and other wines happens here. Finally, we got to taste the ports. We had 5 different ports to try, each a different age, and we learned about how the age affects the color and taste of the wine. These were all very delicious, and of course we had to procure a few bottles to take home. We have to say that the prices here were ridiculously affordable. We left with 5 bottles of port wine for less than 30 euros. At this point our tour was over, so we settled in for the hour-long ride home. What did we think of this tour? Well, to be frank, it was spectacular. This tour lasted about 8 hours, but between us getting picked up at 8:30 and getting dropped off back in the city center of Porto at 4:30, the time really flew by. Let's start at the very beginning. Our driver and tour guide for most of the trip, João, was fantastic. He had a lot of knowledge about the river region and the wine production that took place here, and he kept us all engaged and entertained during most of the driving that was done. There was a lot of driving involved in this tour. The morning drive was nearly 2 hours, and then there's another 2.5 hours of driving to get back to Porto. However, the van we had was comfortable, and the air conditioning worked. Also, we were not packed in like sardines, like many of the previous reviews had mentioned. We also were able to stop a few times for coffee or to stretch our legs, so it actually ended up being a pleasant ride. All of the vineyards that we visited were fantastic as well, and the local guides were great. At the end of the day, we had counted that we sampled 9 different wines, 6 different ports, and 3 types of honey at the 3 vineyards we visited. We also enjoyed a full 3-course traditional Portuguese meal at this beautiful little mountain village restaurant. And we enjoyed a boat ride down the Douro. All of these things were included in the price of our tour, and we didn't spend a cent outside of our tour price, except for the souvenir bottles of wine, of course. When it comes to how strenuous this activity is, this was something we were concerned about, because we had heard of wine tours taking you through the vineyards. Now normally this wouldn't be an issue, but the Douro Valley has very steep inclines, and it was very hot today. We were happy to find that almost all of our tours were done inside. If you have a hard time getting around or have mobility issues, you should be fine. However, many of these older vineyard buildings aren't really that accessible for wheelchairs, so make sure you call the tour operator before you go. All in all, this tour cost us about $150 per person. We thought that price was totally worth it. We suggest this tour to almost everyone who asks us. If you have a day to explore the Douro River Valley, but don't have any other means of transportation, this is a great way to get there. Remember that you can find a link to this tour down in the description below. Now, one thing we do have to say is we think a tour like this is probably the best way to see everything in the Douro Valley that you want to. Of course, you could stay in the Douro Valley and rent a car, but that would probably be a little bit more expensive. If you decide to take the train to the Douro Valley, you'll see great views, but it'll be difficult to get to all of the vineyards you want to, because the transportation here really isn't that great. All of the vineyards we went to were in very obscure locations and high up on the valley walls. Definitely not within walking distance, and no public transportation went there. You would basically need to rent a car in order to do all of the things that we mentioned. Overall, this tour was the best way of getting to do everything we wanted to in one day, and we would highly recommend it. We hope that you enjoyed this review of our wine tasting tour down the Douro Valley. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one!